6. The nuclear reactors of Gabon. Nuclear reactors are man-made machines that are designed to generate energy through the process of nuclear fission. They've been around since 1942, but natural nuclear reactors have existed for much longer. In fact, natural nuclear reactors have been on this planet for billions of years, long before man-made nuclear reactors were ever created. The country of Gabon in Central Africa in particular was once home to a whopping 16 natural nuclear reactors. These nuclear reactors in Gabon were able to generate around 100 kilowatts of energy. That's enough energy to light approximately 1,000 light bulbs at the same time. Gabon is short for the Gabonese Republic, and it's located on the western coast of Central Africa. In the 1800s, the country started out as a French territory, and today it has a population of around 2.2 million people. The Gabonese Republic earned its independence from France, along with several other countries in Africa, in 1960. And geologically speaking, Gabon is fascinating because it's mostly made up of metamorphic and igneous rock that's nearly 2 billion years old, dating back to the Paleo-Proterozoic era. Gabon's ancient crust contains important natural resources, including iron, magnesium, gold, uranium, and petroleum. And throughout the country's landscape, researchers and explorers alike can find amazing ancient land formations, like the hydrocarbon-filled rift basins that were formed during the breakup of Pangaea 175 million years ago. And another ancient formation that was discovered almost 50 years ago is the natural nuclear reactors of Gabon. In the 1970s, miners stumbled upon these 16 nuclear reactors in a southeastern region of the Gabonese Republic called Oklo. At the time, they were looking for uranium that would be used to power French-owned nuclear energy plants. But as researchers were made aware of the natural nuclear fission that was occurring in these Gabon nuclear reactors, they wanted to understand how this chemical process was taking place so casually. In man-made nuclear reactors, water typically acts as a coolant and is required to slow down chemical reactions by decreasing the speed that neutrons move. And by doing this, it in turn decreases the rate at which uranium atoms split, resulting in more steam production and manageable heat. Without water to act as a coolant, nuclear fission would happen so fast that the reactor vessel could grow so hot that it could burn, melt, or even explode. When scientists were analyzing the natural nuclear reactors in Gabon, they realized that for natural nuclear fission to happen, a far higher concentration of uranium-235 had to be present at one point in order to start the chain reaction. And given the high half-life of uranium, 700 million years, this concentration would have been present almost 2 billion years before the discovery of the uranium ores. Atoms would have collided and split naturally with such a high concentration of uranium-235, and this would have led to further reactions. And researchers now believe that this immense concentration of uranium was likely caused by a combination of high bacterial activity in ancient times and the weathering of igneous rocks. But wouldn't there have needed to be a coolant to prevent these natural reactors from causing an explosion? Yes. According to scientists, there was once a significant amount of water in the region of Oklo, which would have acted as a natural coolant 2 billion years ago. The water would have prevented any unstable and uncontrollable reactions from happening. And while the existence of natural nuclear reactions is amazing as it is, scientists were more fascinated by the fact that testing in the area didn't show evidence of high radioactivity. There's also no sign of any radioactive exposure in the wildlife nearby. This is because the once toxic plutonium and cesium have since decayed into barium, which isn't harmful to humans. The discovery of these natural nuclear reactors in Gabon suggests that Mother Nature has found a way to naturally rid the region of significant radioactivity over time, something that even the most esteemed scientists haven't been able to figure out. And while it's safe to visit Gabon now, it was certainly one of the most dangerous places in the world millions of years ago. 5. Death Valley National Park. America's Death Valley National Park is a beautiful place, but as beautiful as this place is, it's doubly as dangerous. It's located on the California-Nevada border, just east of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. The park's boundaries include the southern section of Eureka Valley, the northern section of Panamint Valley, most of Saline Valley, and of course, Death Valley. Situated between the arid Mojave and the Great Basin deserts, the park occupies an interface zone, protecting the Mojave Desert's northwest corner and its diverse environment of sand dunes, salt flats, badlands, canyons, mountains, and valleys. Death Valley is the biggest national park in the contiguous U.S., and it's also the driest, hottest, and lowest of all the other national parks in the country. The second lowest point in the Western Hemisphere and the lowest in all of North America, Badwater Basin can be found here at an astonishing 282 feet, 86 meters below sea level. And over 93% of the park is designated as wilderness areas. Several different species of plants and animals call this place home and have adapted to the harsh environment. Creatures like coyotes, sheep, and bighorns live here, as well as the endangered Death Valley pupfish, a survivor from significantly wetter times in the region. But when it comes to plant life, you won't find much other than Joshua trees and creosote bushes. During the summer months, temperatures here can reach as high as 134 degrees Fahrenheit, 57 degrees Celsius. And due to the extreme heat in Death Valley, several people have lost their lives. Every single year, multiple deaths and accidents occur here, with one of the most recent incidents happening in May of 2023. A semi-truck transporting 2 trailers full of brush trimmings overheated and broke down on Highway 190 while on its way out of the valley. Luckily, firefighters were able to contain the fire using firefighting foam, and no injuries were reported. But some people aren't so lucky. In late June of 2022, a park visitor ran out of gas in the middle of Death Valley and was forced to walk to the nearest gas station. But the 67-year-old wasn't equipped to deal with the intense heat of the desert, and his body was discovered on June 14th, roughly 2.4 miles or 4 kilometers from his vehicle. According to reports, temperatures in the park at the time had reached a staggering 123 degrees Fahrenheit, 50.5 degrees Celsius. Have you ever been to Death Valley? Let us know in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. 4. Fort Hood. Like most things in Texas, Fort Hood is huge. In fact, it's one of the biggest military bases in the whole world. It's located right outside Killeen, Texas, and it's the only military post in the U.S. that's capable of training and stationing 2 armored divisions. However, violent crimes take place inside Fort Hood all the time, and in 2020 alone, over 39 soldiers stationed here lost their lives or mysteriously vanished. 5 soldiers were murdered, 13 took their own lives, and 11 of the deaths were never resolved. And the rest, well, nobody knows what happened to them. There weren't really many issues in Fort Hood until the late 2000s. On June 12, 2007, the deceased body of Lawrence George Spader Jr. was discovered on the base. Lawrence had been missing for several days when his body was located. Apparently, he'd been sent on a map reading exercise and somehow got lost. And according to his autopsy, he died of hypothermia and dehydration. An investigation was launched afterward, despite the man's death being ruled an accident. What they found was that Army trainers at the base had a massive error in judgment when they were planning the map reading exercise, putting 300 other soldiers in immense danger and resulting in Lawrence's death. This incident was tragic and accidental, but the mass shooting at Fort Hood in 2009 was intentional. It took place on November 5, 2009, and was later classified as the deadliest shooting on an American military base. Nidal Hassan, a psychiatrist and U.S. Army major, fatally shot a total of 13 people, but he injured 30 others. The massacre began when Nidal, armed with a semi-automatic pistol, suddenly shouted Allah Akbar, which means God is great in Arabic. He then opened fire at a defenseless crowd inside one of the processing centers at Fort Hood. The soldiers in the processing center were unarmed and were all either returning from deployment and receiving medical screenings or were getting ready to be deployed overseas. Nidal's rampage only lasted roughly 10 minutes before he was shot by civilian police. He sustained severe injuries and was left paralyzed from the waist down, but he survived. During his trial, he admitted to the shooting and was found guilty of 45 counts of attempted, premeditated murder, and he was later sentenced to death for his horrific crimes. Another mass shooting took place at Fort Hood in 2014, leaving 3 soldiers dead and 16 other military personnel wounded. This second shooting occurred on April 2, 2014. and was carried out by Army specialist Ivan Lopez. But 8 minutes after he began his attack, Ivan turned the gun on himself. What's hard to believe about this incident is that just 1 month before it happened, a psychiatrist examined Ivan and found that he had no suicidal or violent tendencies. It's difficult to imagine that if Ivan had only been properly examined, the massacre wouldn't have happened. But it did, and Fort Hood continues to have issues with violence to this day. 3. Brazil's Snake Island. In the Atlantic Ocean, sitting just 25 miles or 40.2 kilometers off the coast of Brazil, is a place called Snake Island. It's fairly small and in total only covers 106 acres or 43 hectares of land. But Snake Island has a deadly reputation, and it's strictly forbidden to travel there. The biggest threat on the island is its colonies of golden lancehead snakes, a pit viper species. Just one bite from these snakes will kill a grown man in less than 3 hours. The venom will burn through the victim's flesh, causing them to bleed to death. They mostly prey on birds and lizards, but they won't hesitate to defend themselves if they feel threatened. These snakes are only about 2 to 4 feet, or 0.6 to 1.2 meters long, but their venom makes them one of the deadliest snake species in the world. The island has a temperate climate, and its terrain varies from rainforest to bare rock. It's also the only place on Earth where these golden lancehead snakes can be found in the wild. The species was stranded on the island following the last ice age when ocean levels rose and separated the island from the mainland. And today, these snakes are considered critically endangered. But without human interference, scientists hope that the population will increase, although it's difficult to keep track of their accurate numbers because, again, it's illegal to travel there. 2. The Gates of Hell. The Darvaza gas crater near the town of Darvaza, Turkmenistan, is sometimes referred to as the Gates of Hell. It's a burning natural gas field that's collapsed into a cavern, creating a crater that's now illuminated by dozens of natural gas fires. The crater formed back in 1971 when a Soviet-owned drilling rig accidentally punched into a large underground natural gas cavern, causing the unstable ground to collapse and the drilling rig to fall into it. After the pocket of gas was punctured, poisonous fumes started leaking out at an alarming rate. The Soviets thought they could prevent a potential environmental catastrophe by setting the hole on fire. They believed that after a few weeks, the flames would die out. But it's now decades later, and the fiery pit is still burning. When looking at this 230-foot wide, 70.1 meters hole, it truly does resemble some kind of opening to the underworld. It looks like the caldera of an active volcano, and it's visible from miles away after sunset. And amazingly, despite the crater's ever-present flames and chilling nickname, people still trek into the desert of Turkmenistan to witness the sight, and perhaps to catch a glimpse of hell itself. 1. Futenma Air Station. Located in Okinawa Prefecture, on the main island of Okinawa, Japan, is the Futenma Air Station, operated by the U.S. Marine Corps. It was built in 1945, just before the end of the Second World War, and it's remained active to this day. But the base's presence on the island meets constant resistance from the native residents of Okinawa, leading to a long list of controversies. Futenma has been involved in a number of conflicts between the inhabitants of Okinawa, the Japanese government, and the U.S. military. Multiple helicopter and plane crashes have periodically taken place since the base was constructed on the island. The most notorious crash that the airbase was involved in happened back in 2004 at Okinawa International University, located in Ginowan. And although there were no casualties, the military's handling of the helicopter wreckage sparked various protests at the base. The U.S. Marine Corps blocked off the university for a full 4 days after the incident, preventing Japanese police from investigating or accessing the site of the crash. And additionally, the base resumed flights of the CH-53D models, the same type of helicopter involved in the wreck, before ever disclosing to the public the cause of the wreck. More recently, in 2017, another crash occurred at an elementary school near Futenma, reigniting tensions between the residents of Okinawa and the U.S. military. Another source of tension is the noise that emanates from the airfield. A study even concluded that the noise from the airbase has contributed to digestive and respiratory problems for residents living nearby. The noise also affects people's mental health, leading to depression and nervousness for those in Okinawa. Due to these stressors, a movement in favor of relocating Futenma Air Station developed in 1995. It was proposed that the base be moved to Henoko, a coastal district in the city of Nago, but residents of Okinawa fought back against this as they wanted Futenma removed from the island entirely. Their pleas, however, fell on deaf ears, and construction began in Henoko in December 2018. And according to the most recent reports, it's still being built today. 10. It's illegal to leave. North Korea is the only country in the world that forbids its citizens from leaving as a standard rule. Exiting the country requires the government's permission, which is almost never granted to ordinary civilians. Those who are allowed to travel are usually either high-ranking officials who are loyal to the Kim regime, or they're under constant watch by someone who is. Diplomats, elite scholars, athletes, and workers are among those who are most commonly granted permission to leave North Korea. After escaping the country, math Olympiad Jong-yul Kim revealed that he and others were strongly cautioned not to let capitalism and other fixtures of the outside world sway them into believing life outside the Hermit Kingdom is better. He also recalled being specifically warned not to interact with South Korean competitors. In addition to being closely monitored during their time away, North Korean citizens who leave the country are subjected to intensive intelligence debriefs upon their return to ensure that no free-thinking rhetoric makes its way into their mind. 9. You might die trying. North Korea shares an 880-mile-long border with China. Much of it is dominated by inhospitable terrain. Most defectors escape to China by sneaking across the Yalu River. These crossings are often made under the cover of night, and even then, defectors risk being caught by border guards, who are reportedly under orders to shoot defectors on sight. In the past, people who were caught trying to escape were typically either executed following their capture, or slowly worked and starved to death in one of the regime's brutal labor camps. After superseding his late father as North Korea's dictator in 2011, Kim Jong-un tightened security at the border, which was already heavily guarded to begin with. In recent years, he's stepped up these efforts even more by deploying more guards to the most popular defector crossings with orders to shoot escapees unconditionally. Due to these heightened measures, defections are reportedly at their lowest in years. It's extremely rare for defectors to escape via the country's southern border with neighboring South Korea, which runs along the 38th parallel. Known as the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, it's ironically one of the world's most heavily guarded borders. Measuring roughly 2.5 miles wide and 154 miles long, it's lined with several 100,000 combat-ready troops on both sides. The DMZ is also surrounded by razor wire fences and littered with landmines, making even the less guarded parts of it extremely dangerous and difficult to cross. Much of this forbidden stretch of land has remained untouched by humans since the 1960s. Defectors rarely try to escape via the DMZ, and not many succeed. Those who make it across are usually either exceptionally agile or just incredibly lucky. Among the few who have done it was a 30-year-old career gymnast who managed to scale the 10-foot perimeter fence and sneak across unharmed, something that a person of average capabilities would be far less likely to accomplish. 8. Other escape routes. North Korea shares a border with South Korea, China, and Russia. As you just learned, China is arguably the easiest country to escape to, while it's almost impossible to cross through the DMZ into South Korea. It's also extremely rare for defectors to traverse the heavily guarded 10-mile border with Russia. Like China, Russia considers any unauthorized North Koreans in the country to be illegal immigrants rather than refugees. Instead of offering humanitarian aid, defectors are immediately sent back to North Korea. With a large portion of North Korea being bordered by ocean, some may wonder why it's not more common for defectors to leave by boat. Obtaining a boat, even in ramshackle condition, is extremely difficult in the first place. And even if someone manages to get past that hurdle, they probably won't make it far in the country's heavily patrolled coastal waters, And if they do, the conditions at sea are likely to kill them. It's simply not a feasible plan. If you had to sneak out of the country, how would you do it? Tell us in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. 7. Getting through China. Many, if not most, North Korean defectors who make it across the Yalu River to China rely on human smugglers to help them navigate a roundabout route to South Korea, where escapees receive help starting new lives. It's expensive to hire a smuggler, and it also comes with a risk of being caught. The smugglers themselves also take major risks, and as the Chinese government intensifies its surveillance of the country's population, fewer people are willing to get into the smuggling trade. And while there's no denying that smugglers typically exploit desperate people for profit, they often play a key role in getting escapees where they need to go. Even workers who have permission to be in China but don't want to return to North Korea have struggled in recent years to find people willing to help transport them. As a result, many North Koreans end up stuck in China or are caught in the country illegally and sent back to the Hermit Kingdom. As of August 2023, around 2,000 defectors were being detained in China, where they are considered illegal immigrants rather than refugees. COVID-19 lockdown restrictions on both sides of the border made it even more difficult for defectors to leave North Korea and enter China. According to the New York Times, the number of North Koreans who reached South Korea dropped from 1,047 in 2019 to just 63 in 2022. 6. Public executions. Defectors who get caught trying to escape may still face death even if they're not shot on sight. North Korea has a long-standing history of carrying out public executions for an array of crimes, including petty offenses like theft or getting caught with foreign media. As of 2019, there were 318 identified execution sites throughout the country, where entire communities, including children and the prisoner's family, are forced to come outside and watch. This is obviously done to deter people from doing things that could land the same fate. A lot of executions are carried out at forced labor camps and political prisons. In these cases, family members who are not also imprisoned are simply left to wonder whatever happened to their loved one, who they most certainly know they'll probably never see again. And in many cases, an offender's family is imprisoned simply for being related to the person, which means that they'll never have the chance to even try escaping the country, and that they too may ultimately be executed. 5. There are other things to worry about. North Korea is rife with poverty and its effects, which include food insecurity, a lack of access to healthcare, and difficulty meeting other basic needs. When getting through each day is a challenge, it's hard for someone to look beyond their immediate survival needs and plan for the future. During the 1990s, the country experienced a major famine that killed millions of people. Known to North Koreans as the Arduous March, it came during a period of economic decline and was triggered by a series of severe floods that washed out a large portion of the country's farmable land. North Korea never reached the same level of self-sufficiency that predated the famine, and continues to occasionally rely on foreign food donations to keep its population fed. Defections actually rose during the famine period, and food instability remains a factor in many people's decisions to flee. But it can also prevent someone from escaping, especially in cases when a person is weakened by malnutrition, age, or other ailments. Escaping North Korea and getting through China entails crossing rivers, climbing, long car rides, sleeping in uncomfortable spaces, and lots of walking, including over rough terrain, which means that a person has to be in decent health and physical shape. In addition to the obstacles faced by the elderly, sick, and other vulnerable people, many must choose between staying in North Korea or leaving their small children behind, because it's not feasible to escape with them. Simply put, North Korean citizens are often faced with difficult personal circumstances and decisions that affect their ability or willingness to flee. And it's probably safe to assume that a lot more people would at least try if they felt they were in a better position to succeed. 4. There's no freedom of information. Foreign media is banned in North Korea, including news, movies, and TV shows. Civilians are also banned from having the internet at home. Any internet access is heavily censored and monitored, and home telephones are a luxury typically reserved for elite officials, rather than an everyday item. Cell phones are common but rudimentary, with no internet or ability to make or receive foreign calls. This is all done to restrict the Korean people's access to information from the outside world, which challenges the Kim regime's narrative that they live in the best country on the planet and that life isn't better anywhere else. Some people manage to get their hands on banned materials, including DVDs and USB drives containing bootleg movies and TV shows that are smuggled into North Korea from China. This flow of goods has helped a lot of people realize that a lot of what they were taught about their country and other places simply isn't true, and freedom isn't a hard concept to sell. It's something that a lot of people are naturally going to want when they see and learn about it. And this is one of many things that compel people to defect from North Korea. But there are still limits on the amount of information people have access to, and many are afraid to take the risk, since getting caught with banned materials can easily land someone and their entire family in a forced labor camp. 3. Entire families are punished. Successfully escaping North Korea does not mean the end of a person's troubles. They still have their family to worry about, and the decision to flee is made knowing that their loved ones may be punished. To discourage citizens from defecting, the government often follows a policy of imprisoning 3 generations of an escapee's family, in many cases for life, and even if they had no knowledge of the defectors' plans to flee. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, many children are born into captivity and raised as prisoners because they are considered guilty by blood. The 3-generation policy dates back to 1950, when it was implemented with the goal of eliminating entire bloodlines of counter-revolutionary North Koreans. In addition to dictating the punishment of defectors, it is often applied to people who are accused of committing political crimes. In cases where a defector's family is not imprisoned, they can count on being under heightened surveillance. And in these cases, it's often just a matter of time before authorities find a reason to make an arrest. In early 2023, an entire family was arrested after a mother was caught making banned phone calls to her daughter who had escaped to the south. According to Radio Free Asia, the person who's caught maintaining contact with a defector is usually the only one who's punished. It's unusual for their family members to be considered guilty by association, leading to speculation that the regime is cracking down on the practice by intensifying the consequences. Imagine knowing that your parent or child could go to prison for life for your actions, or even for taking your phone call. And it's not hard to understand why many people are reluctant to flee North Korea. 2. No freedom of movement. Most people can move around freely within their country, unless they're on a probation for a crime. And even then, they're usually at least allowed to travel throughout their state, and to leave the state with permission. Sadly, this is a lot more freedom than a typical law-abiding North Korean civilian has. In North Korea, only the elite own or have access to vehicles. And there's a severe fuel shortage due to international sanctions imposed by the US and other countries. As a result, the Hermit Kingdom's roads are noticeably bare, even in cities. Traveling to another part of the country requires permission from authorities or a work supervisor, as well as a reason. The military will often make sure that a person with special permission to travel gets off the train at their designated stop, and that they return to where they came from. Furthermore, the Kim regime has forcibly relocated hundreds of thousands of civilians to remote and less desirable parts of the country that are difficult to escape. This is said to occur on a fairly routine basis and is often carried out as a punishment for political reasons. 1. Political prison and forced labor camps. It's believed that there are 4 political prison camps and as many as 20 forced labor camps throughout North Korea. The earliest among them were modeled after Soviet gulags, and the system has expanded massively in the decades since it was first implemented. Many, if not most, of the prisoners at these camps are accused of doing things that aren't even considered crimes in free countries, like trying to leave North Korea. Defectors' families are also often confined to labor and prison camps, and many never leave. An estimated 80,000 to 120,000 people are imprisoned in these brutal facilities, where the conditions are said to be brutally inhumane. Inmates are subjected to torture, beatings, starvation, and other abuse, as well as execution. Those who are not starved, worked, or abused to death often succumb to diseases and health conditions that they receive no treatment for and are expected to continue working with. Due to the constant lack of food, many resort to eating rats, snakes, tree bark, grass, and other creatures that most people wouldn't eat if they had any other choice. And those who get caught foraging for these items are subject to being beaten or even killed. As you can probably imagine, prisoners at these camps have a much lower expected lifespan than other North Koreans, who also suffer greatly from malnutrition, illness, and other effects of poverty, limited access to healthcare, and abuse at the hands of the state.
Background: Marseille was born in Berlin, Germany in 1919. His descendants fled France and settled in Germany because they were Protestants living in a Catholic country. Marseille's parents divorced when he was young, so Marseille lived with his mother and stepfather. And when he contracted influenza during his youth, he nearly lost his life. As a youngster, Marseille was classically trained on the piano. He had a love for music, especially American jazz. Although he enjoyed playing the piano and listening to music, Marseille was a rebellious young man. While in school, Marseille was viewed as a lazy student, always getting into trouble. But somehow, he changed his focus, and at 17 he graduated with high marks. The next step for Marseille was the German military. The bad boy persona and moments of laziness didn't cease once he enlisted. While in the military, Marseille found his passion with flight. His birth father was in the military and recommended Marseille for flight training. And he requested to join the Luftwaffe. Fellow students and instructors were in awe of Marseille's skills. There was talent, but there was also a blatant disregard for rules and regulations. And one of the biggest issues with Marseille was his alleged drunkenness. Marseille wasn't afraid to toss back a few drinks the night before a flight. He would show up inebriated or nursing a massive hangover. It's rumored that he landed his plane during a training mission without permission because he had to urinate so bad. Apparently, Marseille had decided to party the night before the flight, and his actions were viewed as a major offense. It could have resulted in a court-martial. However, reprimands never got through to Marseille. Instead, the instructors learned to live with the rebellious pilot. They knew they had a gifted pilot in their ranks. And all they needed to do was to get it through Marseille's head that the military life was one of discipline. He went on to graduate in July 1940, despite his behavioral issues and blatant disregard for the rules. And he was then assigned to his first mission, one involving the invasion of Britain. Luftwaffe. During the late 1930s, the Luftwaffe was perhaps the largest and most intimidating air force in the world. Some 1,800 aircraft and some 20,000 personnel made up the Luftwaffe. They had their first taste of combat during the Spanish Civil War, and by the summer of 1940, they were ready to smash the mighty Isle of Britain. It was over Kent, England, on August 24, 1940, when Marseille had his first kill while piloting a Messerschmitt Bf 109. In true Marseille fashion, he disregarded orders and broke from formation to pursue a British Hurricane Mk1 fighter. And when Marseille returned to base, he was praised by his commander. But the same commander then reprimanded him for breaking formation and pursuing the British pilot. German officers understood that while Marseille was a gifted pilot, he was also a lousy teammate. That encounter left a major impression on the young Marseille. He wrote in a letter to his mother, "Today I shot down my first opponent. It does not sit well with me." He went on to say that he kept thinking about the mother of the pilot he killed and how she would react when she found out her son was dead. He struggled with the guilt of his first victory, stating, "I am to blame for this death." Then, in September of 1940, Marseille almost lost his own life near the Straits of Dover in England. Marseille's aircraft suffered major damage during a mission. He tried to radio his position, but it was no use. So Marseille had no choice but to eject himself from the plane. He landed in the water, and it took 3 grueling hours of paddling to stay alive. Marseille was rescued, but had to be hospitalized for exposure and exhaustion. Although he earned victories in the skies, Marseille was a complete handful when he was away from duty. When he wasn't taking down enemy aircraft, Marseille frequented bars and earned himself a reputation as a notorious ladies' man. And some of his most colorful tales occurred when he was stationed in France. There's a story about Marseille where he stole an officer's car to drive into town to drink and meet girls. He apparently had romantic flings with the wives and girlfriends of powerful people in the German military and Nazi party. One officer recalled he was tempestuous, temperamental, and unruly. 30 years later, he would have been called a playboy. But due to his impressive reputation in the skies, Marseille would receive a mere slap on the wrist for his transgressions. His actions were a problem, but his opinions about German politics were far more controversial. It was no secret that Marseille was anti-Nazi, and he had no issue being dismissive of Hitler. Marseille would become one of the most feared pilots of the Luftwaffe. His reign of terror was 2 years, but it's reported that Marseille shot down a total of 158 aircraft. And one of his biggest accomplishments was shooting down 15 aircraft in one day. Marseille would aim for enemy planes and would shoot from the nose to the engine. But apparently, he wouldn't aim for the cockpit. There are tales of Marseille flying beside the planes he'd seriously damaged to show pilots where to land safely. While these stories and statistics are fascinating, the legacy of Marseille would continue in North Africa. And it was there where he solidified his career as a top German ace. Would you ever consider going to pilot school? Why or why not? Let us know in the comments. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. Conquest of North Africa. During World War II, Germany and Italy focused their attention on taking North Africa. They wanted to control the Suez Canal, so Britain wouldn't be able to get supplies to their colonies. Additionally, controlling North Africa would mean that Germany and Italy would have access to oil reserves. But Britain and France weren't about to lose North Africa, and the fighting that ensued was brutal, to say the least. Due to his escapades in France, Marseille was sent to North Africa in 1941. But the moment he stepped on African soil, it seemed he'd already clashed with his superiors. However, it would be North Africa where Marseille would turn into a superstar. One person who served with the pilot stated, "If there had been girls in Africa, I do not think he would have had such success." Old habits traveled with the ace, and once again, he broke formation to shoot down an enemy plane. For this, he'd be reprimanded when he returned to base. Marseille was so unorthodox that he was sent out at times on missions with one accompanying aircraft. But punishment didn't deter the brash young pilot. Then, in North Africa, Marseille had yet another brush with death. While on a mission, Marseille encountered French pilot James Denis, and Marseille's aircraft was fired upon by Denis. Several bullets barely missed him, so he was alive, but his aircraft was seriously damaged. By some miracle though, Marseille made a safe landing. Denis and him would meet again, however, and Marseille was beaten a second time. But he walked away relatively unscathed from another close call with bullets and a crash landing. Eventually, Marseille's popularity as a pilot earned him the opportunity to meet Hitler and his top Nazi advisors. Marseille was asked to play piano, so he decided to do something incredibly brazen. He performed a jazz piece, which was considered degenerate music in Germany and was outlawed. Another man would have faced punishment, but once again, Marseille succeeded in enraging his superiors without receiving any consequences. Showdown. When it really came down to it, Marseille wasn't all fun and games. It's reported that he took time in North Africa to improve his skills as a pilot. He would spend time studying the enemy from intelligence that was gathered, and he even spent days improving his marksmanship and sharpening his fighting tactics. Also, in a shocking turn of events, Marseille gave up alcohol. he exercised and purposely exposed his eyes to the desert sun. He wanted to always have the advantage while in the sky. But perhaps the biggest change was that Marseille was allowed to fly on missions with only a single accompanying aircraft. In June 1942, Marseille encountered South African Air Force or SAAF pilots Robin Barr, Cecil Golding and Louis Botha near Bir Hakeim in Libya. The South African pilots were part of a squadron sent out to deal with German bombers in the area, and one of the German planes on that mission was piloted by Marseille. The day started off poorly for the SAAF fighters. What was supposed to be a squadron of 14 was quickly whittled down to just 11 planes. 2 of the planes crashed into each other while attempting to take off from the runway, and another plane had engine trouble and was sent back to base. The SAAF planes that went into the skies that day were supposed to have top cover from their comrades, but that didn't happen, so a showdown was inevitable. Parr was a seasoned pilot and had been serving for the SAAF since 1940, and Golding was a young pilot that had joined the SAAF in 1941. He was a tough pilot that had shot down enemy aircraft but had survived various crash landings. Botha was the most experienced of the 3, having earned his wings in 1939. All 3 men were flying aircraft that was considered outdated and inferior to the aircraft used by the Germans. The SAAF were reportedly outnumbered, but they took on the Germans anyway. Details of this encounter are disputed. Marseille claimed that he easily shot down 6 of the SAAF aircraft while they were flying in a defensive circle, including those piloted by Parr, Golding and Botha. Parr died when his plane exploded, but both Golding and Botha were able to land their heavily damaged planes safely. The SAAF may have taken down 1 German aircraft during this battle, but that was nothing compared to what Marseille was able to do single-handedly. His plane's cannon even faded while in the air, making his record that day all the more impressive. Golding was interviewed in 2011, however, and he stated that Marseille's claims weren't factual. Golding said that Marseille couldn't know for certain if he'd shot down 6 planes during an intense fight. This battle was just another chapter in the book of a feared German ace, and Marseille would go on to rack up 100 kills as a pilot. He would be one of only 11 German pilots at the time to hold that kill record. A legend is lost. Marseille was highly decorated and referred to as the Star of Africa, but because of this honor, he feared he'd be taken away from his missions and sent around Germany on a propaganda tour. Unfortunately for him, his fears proved true, as he was sent away for that exact thing, and it wasn't easy being in the spotlight. Marseille continued to defy his officers and the Nazi Party. And while in Africa, Marseille befriended South African prisoner of war Matthew Letulu, who went by the name Matthias. The friendship went against Nazi policies. Letulu was black and Marseille was white, and he had no problem defying racial segregation statutes. He would tell his fellow pilots and officers, "Where I go, Matthias goes." And this wasn't the only time that Marseille defied party politics. There was a time when Marseille went AWOL while in Germany. Marseille had friends and neighbors who were Jewish, and he was horrified to learn what had happened to them. The incident broke him, and the German secret police were then forced to track him down. Marseille, the hero, was starting to crack. As the war progressed, the Germans were suddenly becoming overmatched by the Allies, but Marseille continued his reign of terror in the skies. And on September 1st, 1942, Marseille shot down a reported 17 planes in one day. 8 of those were said to have taken place in less than 10 minutes. By the end of the month, he was involved in another mission that saw him taking out 7 more aircraft. This battle had driven Marseille to the point of exhaustion. He recalled one of the pilots being exceptionally skilled, stating, "He was the best one so far. He nearly got me." And at the time, Marseille's total tally was 158. There were reports of him sleepwalking and experiencing numerous nightmares. And it's believed that he may have been suffering from PTSD while still serving as a pilot. Marseille would make his last flight on September 30th, 1942, near Sidi Abdul Rahman, Egypt. His aircraft experienced engine trouble and Marseille had no choice but to eject. Something went wrong though, and his body violently slammed into the vertical stabilizer on his plane. His parachute also failed to deploy, so Marseille fell to the ground and he died on impact. In the book, The Star of Africa, the story of Hans Marseille, a doctor that attended to Marseille was reported to have said the finely cut features of his face below a high forehead were nearly undisturbed. The doctor then compared Marseille's face to that of a tired child. In the end, Marseille's death wasn't at the hands of an Allied pilot. It was his own malfunctioning plane that sealed his fate. He was buried at a cemetery for German soldiers in Libya, but he'd be reinterred at another Libyan cemetery in 1989. A ceremony was held for Marseille, and in attendance was Matthias Letulu. Surprisingly, Letulu survived being a prisoner of the Germans. When the most senior German ace, Adolf Galland, was asked about Marseille, he replied he was the unrivaled virtuoso among the fighter pilots of World War II. His achievements were previously considered impossible. However, there are some that question the number of kills claimed by Marseille. An article published on HistoryNet.com did question the claims of Marseille. According to fighter combat author Robert Shaw, in the heat of combat, you can't waste time verifying claims. He then goes on to say that your mind can play tricks on you when your life is in danger. Shaw explained that you can see smoke coming out of an aircraft, or it can even seem like pieces are falling off a plane. But if you follow that airplane and watch it until it crashes, you're gonna get shot down by somebody else. The same article noted that German pilots were part of a fly till you die policy. But that wasn't a policy that the US implemented. Also, Marseille's kill record was far more impressive than any Allied pilot. In conclusion, Marseille's life was a tapestry of complexity, characterized by a larger-than-life persona that encompassed both moments of honor and periods of womanizing indulgence. But despite the contradictions that shaped his existence, his enduring legacy is one that will remain forever in history. The magnitude of his achievements in such a remarkably short span is unlikely to be paralleled, leaving behind a void that may never be filled by another pilot of his caliber. Do you believe the record of Marseille? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.